Welcome to Fleets Evolved, where we talk about the reality of commercial fleet electrification. Each episode, I sit down with industry experts to cut through the noise and explore what's actually working, what isn't, and where fleet operators get stuck. If you're responsible for electrifying a fleet, you already know that this isn't a walk in the park, and getting the decisions right really matters. I'm Natasha. Welcome to the show. Today, I'm joined by Joe Houlton, Head of EV at ESP Utilities Group. Joe has been with ESP for around 3 years, where he's played a key role in shaping their EV proposition, initially joining as programme lead before stepping into his current role leading their EV strategy and delivery. Before moving into the utilities and electrification space, Joe built deep programme leadership experience across major infrastructure organisations, having spent time at the NHS Property Services and earlier back in his career, programme management at the Transport for London. Across these roles, Joe has developed a real depth of expertise in grid connections and infrastructure delivery. And today he works closely with organisations like MER and their customers to help navigate the often complex world of power, capacity, and getting projects connected. Joe, I am absolutely thrilled to have you on today's episode. Welcome. How are you?
Hi, Natasha. Yeah, also thrilled to be here. So thank you for the invite. Really well. It's really busy in the world of grid connections and EV, but it's great to take some time out to talk about this on a deeper level.
Excellent. Well, listen, you are one of the experts I've had the privilege of working with now for a few years. Really value some of the things and some of your insights. And I thought, what better way than to get you onto the Mayor podcast, and we can have a really open and honest discussion about part of the process, I guess, in this whole EV ecosystem is around power and grid. What I want to try and do is just really keep it quite simple and basic, cover off some of those challenges, opportunities, and really just spend the next kind of 10, 20, 30 minutes getting a real insight into what you know. So I think what better way to kick off if you could maybe just tell us a little bit about your journey into this space and how you came to work at ESP.
Yeah, sure. So as you've got indicated in the intro, I started out in project and program management. So initially working for Network Rail on major infrastructure projects in central London. I was there a few years covering both project development and delivery. And then I transitioned into a slightly different industry, but same project management discipline, working for a media company, Global, who commonly known as the owners of Capital FM, Heart FM, LBC. So they managed a range of projects there for Global. Then I moved into Transport for London, working on their property portfolio as a program manager. I was there a few years before moving into the NHS to work on a fire safety program. And then ended up at ESP. So I was no utilities experience before joining ESP 3 years ago. I joined their delivery team, which at the time was managing EV projects for CPO customers. So that was all about working with CPOs to speed up the grid connection. So it's been a great 3 years working at ESP. I've learned a huge amount about utilities, and it's great to support the sustainable revolution and the kind of move to renewables and electric. And it's really exciting, fast-paced to work, and a lot of challenges and a lot of changes. And that's really dynamic industries. Happy to be here talking a bit more about it.
It is, isn't it? And I think, Joe, you and I are very similar in that sense. I didn't anticipate moving into this world of EV. I mean, I've been here. This is my 8th year now working for MER, formerly Almtronics. And I'm so glad that I ended up getting into the industry because I think, yes, it's complicated, it's challenging, but I don't know if you feel the same, but I feel like we're making some real good things happen. And, being part of this complete ecosystem is something that I'm super proud of. Just for the listeners then, ESP. So what does ESP do and where do you fit into the whole kind of ecosystem from an EV charging perspective?
Yeah, sure. So ESP Utilities Group is a multi-utility company, so we're an independent operator, and we have licenses to operate utilities networks. So that includes gas, electric, water, and heat. So we're licensed to own and operate, distribute in all those utility spaces. So specifically, I'll focus on our electric part of the business as it's the most relevant for EV. So ESP are what's called an IDNO, so an independent distribution network operator. So we have a license to own and operate electricity networks. So that's really important for EV projects and CPOs and fleet customers who are looking to roll out EV charging, because to do that, you need a new grid connection, you need electricity connection. Um, a lot of connections now, particularly for EV, require a high voltage connection. So in those cases, you will need to work with either an IDNO or a DNO, and we are one of the options. Yeah, so we work with a lot of different companies such as yourselves, a lot of different CPOs to help support them on that journey, and we aim to make the grid connection process as simple and as quick as possible.
It's one of those, and thanks for that, Joe, really insightful. It's one of those things, isn't it, in terms of the grid and the connection piece, that's probably like the whole process is important, don't get me wrong, the full end-to-end process of, energizing EV charging. But I think the biggest kind of bone of contention, if I can say that, is the grid connection piece because and I might be speaking a bit out of turn, but I speak to a lot of customers that are involved in this journey, and the grid connection bit, I don't necessarily think they understand what's involved, and I don't think it's as straightforward as we'd like it to be. I get involved with a lot of conversations around connections that's required, and I just feel like it's an area that we probably just need to become a little bit more knowledgeable on and understand it a little bit more. And I think, bearing in mind the process, I mean, I'd quite like to go through that process right now, if you don't mind. I mean, in terms of how, so if I was a fleet and I've got a fleet of commercial vehicles and I'm looking to electrify my estate, so whether I've got one site or I've got a multi-site kind of estate, what's the first step, do you think, in terms, and what does the process look like around getting the right power to that site, should we say?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the first step is for the fleet organisation to look at their estate and work out their strategy and what they want to achieve. So I know that's a piece of work Fleet help customers with, developing that wider strategy. So I think that's a key step, so they know, w- not exactly, but a rough idea of what they want to do and what they want to achieve, and how big is their fleet, where are their depots, where they need power. So I think once the customer has a good idea of that piece, and then certainly, yeah, the next step is to assess the grid and see what power is available. Um, and then really the first step is to make an application to the DNO to see what power is available. So that's something ESP can do for our customers. Applied for thousands of point of applications with each DNO. Uh, but the reason why that's the first step and the key step is it basically tells you what power is available and where it is. And the big benefit of that is, will you get the power you need, and then more importantly, what is the cost of it? So power is it's not always on your doorstep. So depending where the site is, it could be on a doorstep or it could be 3-4 miles away. And obviously, there's such a major cost difference between those two different options. So we'd always recommend to get the applications in as quickly as possible. There's also other challenges with the grids becoming more constrained. So the more applications coming in, there's less power available, longer waits of reinforcement, and kind of things like that. So yeah, we always advise first step, get the power in, see what's available, and we see what the cost is. So that's the first step. So the DNOs have a 35-day SLA to get a POC application out. So that's stage one, 7 weeks, 35 days to get the power back.
At this point, is the customer obliged to, my understanding is that piece there is there's no obligation really. It's about putting the feasibility request in just to understand, I guess, the lay of the land, what's available. And you quite rightly point on cost implications. Is it a viable option for the customer and can it actually happen? That piece of the process, there's no obligation for them to actually accept that POC, is there? It's just you do that piece of work in the first instance.
Yeah, absolutely. So DNOs will charge you for the application. So the fees range from about 1,500 to 2,000 for a standard HV application. So there is a small cost involved. But yeah, you're under no obligation to accept that point of connection. I mean, DNOs have different milestones, but typically you've got, say, 3 months to accept it and make a decision. So yeah, bar the application cost, there's no obligation. You're not committing to hundreds of thousands pounds of work. So yeah, it's definitely worth just getting the application and seeing, because really you can't make any decisions or any moves until you've done that.
Okay, good. Right, sorry to interrupt. I thought that was an important
No,
point to get across.
no problem. So yeah, once the offers come back from the DNO, then really it's about assessing the viability, and that's a very specific, bespoke thing to each customer. Each customer has got kind of different models and different thresholds as to what's acceptable and not acceptable. So what ESP do with the POC offer, we can turn that into our own POC viability assessment. So we'll look at where the point of connection is and where your site is, and we will produce a budget estimate to take the power from the POC to the site. Um, and that really helps customers make a decision on whether the site's going to be viable or not. That's something we can provide information, but it needs the customer to make the decision. So I'd see a national fleet operator with multiple sites. You'd work out roughly what you need across the estate. You'd make all the applications, see what comes back, and then kind of review it from a program level, take the helicopter view rather than, silo work in each site, just doing their own thing. And then, yeah, as I say, it's for the customer to make the call ultimately. And once the customer's done that and they know what POC offers they want to progress with, you need to accept that with the DNO. So that's just a very simple form you fill out, and the DNO will expect payment for the POC at this point. So at this point, it does sort of diverge. So with an IDNO offer, you would just accept the non-contestable works for the DNO, and I'll talk through the process after that. So once you've accepted the DNO's offer, you work with a design house to produce a NERS accredited electrical design. So that's a design from, designing the new electrical network. That then will be approved by the DNO and the IDNO, which roughly takes around, well, the design probably takes around 2 weeks, and the approval process is about 2 weeks as well. It's just sort of 4 weeks of design work. Once you've got a design approved and you know what you're building, you can then move into ICP tendering. So with an IDNO offer, you need to appoint an ICP as well, as a DNO won't build the network for you. So ICPs are accredited parties who can build electrical networks.
What does ICP, is that independent connection provider?
Yes, yes, yeah. So
Yes!
they're
Woo! Top
NERS
marks.
accredited organisations, and they're allowed to basically build electrical networks that DNOs and IDNOs adopt. So yeah, so you need to find an ICP who can build the network. So we can support with tendering to the ICP market, work with a lot of leading ICPs. So work with customers to really find the best fit for them. Um, and then about this similar time, whilst you're tendering and whilst you've got the design, it kicks off the legal process, the land rights process. So that can be it can be quite a lengthy process. So this is agreeing the legal documentation for the cables that will be in the ground, and the substation. If it's a HV connection, there'll be a substation. So a lease is needed on the part of the site where the substation's going to be housed.
'Cause the DNO then they'll end up owning that where the substation sits, that's the DNO's then, isn't it?
The DNO are involved, yeah. So the way it works is there's on a HV connection, there's a HV cable going from the point of connection to the site, which the DNO adopts and owns. Then there's a substation. So there's like a divide in the substation. So part of the equipment is the DNOs, and then the rest of it is the IDNO, and then the IDNO owns any cabling from the substation to the metering point if it's metered at the feeder pillar. So yeah, legals are required, and that's something that can take quite a while, and is often a challenge for CPOs just 'cause the time it can take, and the reason why it can take time is there's multiple different parties involved. There's different sets of lawyers. So when you're selling a house or buying a house, it's a bit like that process where you've got a set of lawyers and the buyer seller's got a set of lawyers, and there's that kind of negotiation piece going on.
Is that where ESP can add some value there though, Joe? Because
Yeah,
I've had that
absolutely.
experience. We're, working with some of the major fleets that I've worked with where we've brought in new connections. I think it's all about somebody just needs to police it, don't they? Somebody in the middle just needs to, because we all know how lawyers can operate, right? And it does take time, and I get that, but I think you just need to be chasing people all the time to make sure that these things are progressing and we're not delaying it, unnecessarily at any point.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was a frustration for a lot of our customers. So what we've done in response to that, we've brought all land rights for ESB in house. So a lot of INOs do outsource legals and land rights. So that's all now been brought in house. Got a 14 strong team of lawyers and paralegals who do exactly that, chasing the various parties and trying to bring these sites to completion as quickly as possible. Um, but one thing fleet operators can do is just engage their lawyers early. So if they're the landowner, it's about getting their lawyers comfortable early with what's in the lease. So again, it's something the legal team at ESP support with. We've got guides and notes and template leases agreed to the DNOs, so we know what they will and won't accept. So we do try and support that through early engagement, upfront engagement with respective legal teams. Because what we've found in the past is you perhaps get a set of lawyers who are not familiar, perhaps with like utilities leases. So you
Yeah.
send out a draft, then you'll get a lot of comments coming back on things that the DNO just won't accept. So and like an INO won't accept either, and that's because it's linked to our license. So
Yeah.
we try and communicate that early and upfront, so so the key stakeholders know, and it cuts down the amount of back and forth
You do
later
you
down the
do this
line.
every day, right? You and the selected specialist teams within ESP. So you're right, you already have that, you can preempt some of the things that the DNO necessarily won't move on. You can really
Yeah,
help guide and advise. And I think that's where the real value is, Joe, for me in the process here. The legal bit can feel a bit of a minefield, and it does feel a bit like, the customer's in quite a bit of control up until that point. And then that's the bit for me where it can become a bit, just a little bit tricky to navigate. So I think having an ESP kind of conduit in between is, for me, feels like it's such a massive benefit for CPOs like Mayor and customers.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, couldn't agree more with that. It can be the longest part of the process, and it's critical to getting the site energized. So that's why, as I say, we brought all land rights in house, so we've got complete control from our side. There is a lot of chasing that goes on, but yeah, we do find that early engagement, a proactive approach up front can reduce that time. And kind of really help things speed up. I mean, for instance, last year we managed to secure 54 legal completions for one customer, um, and it is through collaborative working, upfront engagement, building the understanding and the knowledge of what DNOs and IDNOs just can't accept. So it just cuts down kind of challenging challenges on points where we just know the DNOs just won't bend on.
And that makes a lot of sense. And you did touch there on timelines. And I know this question's probably a little
Yeah.
bit loaded because it's like, how long is a piece of string? I think, is there a difference between timelines around, like, we talk about HV, which is high voltage. You've also got LV, which is low voltage. Again, can you just explain very simply the differences between the two terms there, and then how that might impact the timeline of a project when it comes to bringing in a new connection?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the difference pretty much comes down to the amount of power you need. So low voltage connections typically go up to about 240 kVA, and then anything high voltage is is um, is above that. So the main difference is LV connections generally are quicker and generally cost less. And the main reason for that is you don't need to buy a substation, so that takes out a large amount of cost and time from the program. Some LV connections don't actually need land rights as well, depending on where the point of connection is and where the site is. So again, that can cut out a large amount of time. So the main difference is cost and time. So an LV connection is a lot quicker, but I guess the trade-off is you won't have as much power. So if you are building for the future
Yeah.
now, then an LV connection might not keep you going for as long as you need. So
And it depends on the balance of the infrastructure that you want at a particular site, which is why it's so important to get, you know, you quite rightly touched on the service that Mayor would offer. So even before you decide what size of connection we're going to need, there's a really important piece of work to do before that around optimizing your fleet and understanding what's needed at each location. And then the mix, whether it's AC, DC, a combination of both, will actually have an impact, and the future proofing side of it in terms of what you actually need. I'm with you though, Joe. I think LV, a lot of companies aren't necessarily now going down that route because they're thinking of the future. They're trying to scope it so that there are, you've got the future in mind. And then, so the HV side of it is the opposite. It's anything over the 240 kVA, substation needed, lengthier process in terms of legal and getting that connection. Just give us a rough timeline then. If you were going to go for an LV connection, just approximate, like we won't hold you to this, but from the point where where you're inquiring about power to energizing on an LV connection, what sort of timelines are we talking about?
I mean, that could be around, say, around the 6-month mark. By the time you've got the offer back and the customer's made a decision and you've got an ICP appointed, you've got designs approved. It could be within that order, and then a HV connection, could be up to 12 months, depending on the complexity. It is a difficult question to answer because a lot of it does depend on how quickly the customer moves as well. So, um, if the customer's engaged and ready to go and make decisions quickly, then that can bring the timeline down. If lawyers are engaged and ready to go, again, that can squeeze things. But I guess the long lead times, we've got 7 weeks up front for the POC offer. That's not too long. So the main others are planning. If planning permission's needed, I mean, I guess that could be 8 to 12 weeks. Land rights, similar, but can be longer if there's, specific legal challenges or any third party legals involved. Substation procurement, that could be 12 to 16 weeks and beyond if there's any kind of global supply chain challenges going on as well. So yeah, HV sites can take a lot longer and kind of a lot more thought. And people do probably, particularly early on as they get into their grid connection journey, may perhaps underestimate what's involved. That's what we try and do up front with new customers. We try and sort of communicate and kind of go through all of this in much more detail, so they're aware of kind of what's involved, the challenges, but also the opportunities to bring things forward and speed things up.
And that's where the collaboration piece, I mean, it's a massive buzzword, isn't it, in the industry, and I get that. But it really does make a difference around how, you've touched on so many really interesting points there, Joe, about the involvement that ESP has. And am I right in assuming then, so you deal with a lot of CPOs, Mayor being one of them. How do you work? So we talk about collaboration. So we have an end customer that's interested and wants to work with Mayor because we are offering them all of the other services that go with that full kind of life cycle of installing infrastructure. How do you fit into that relationship journey with Mayor? Because part of me used to think we need to control that relationship. It's our customer. But actually, that's probably not a very sophisticated, clever way of looking at it because you guys are the experts, right? So bringing you in at a certain point in time to really lean on your expertise to me sounds like a really smart way of doing things. What's your view on that?
Yeah, it's a really important point because I think you hit the nail on the head with collaboration. I know it is a bit cheesy and a buzzword, as you say, but there's so many stakeholders involved across the process. So working together in the most efficient way is key to speeding these projects up. And but to answer your question, well, we're happy to. Um, we like to be involved as early as possible because we think that's where the biggest benefits can be made. And we're happy to work, with instance, with Mer, who'd be our customer in this instance, or the end user, depending on the customer's specific requirements, the customer's preference. And the way we work is, we're upfront, transparent. We have weekly meetings with most of our customers where we go through the program, where the grid connection is, um, where the action is, where it sits on the program life cycle, who's doing what the action is, and just keep communicating clearly, identifying any blockers, how we resolve this, how we move forward. And that's what we find just keeps pushing the projects on, having that control and coordination and also oversight. So what we'd like to do is kind of simplify a complex process so it's clear as to what needs to happen to achieve the next step and then keep going that way. So yeah, as I say, the team will meet with the customers. We'll go through any grid connection updates. We'll ask the customers for their updates. We'll collate that and develop an action plan off the back of it. That yeah, we'll then deliver on in conjunction with the customer. Yeah, happy to wherever to be flexible and kind of to work with customers and their customers, however they yeah, prefer really.
And I think that's probably why we work so well with you guys at ESP, because I think we have that same mantra, right? It's about being upfront, honest, getting things done as early as possible, and just being totally transparent around some of the processes, some of the challenges that we might have, some of the opportunities that we need to explore. So thanks for that, Joe. You've given me a really good, and hopefully the listeners, a really good understanding of kind of the process. And it's a process that we assume a connection is available at what we apply for, and it kind of runs through smoothly. So we've got an idea of timelines. We understand the difference between the connections in terms of LV, HV. What I'm interested now to explore is, like, in terms of what happens if we apply for an amount of power that's not available. I'm keen to understand, like, what happens in those scenarios. And I don't know much about this because I don't do this on a daily basis. But interactive connections, like the land grabbing scenario, there must be companies in certain locations that are in the queue for an amount of power. What's your experience like, and how do you advise customers to kind of navigate through those situations?
Yeah, sure. So I guess the first point, if you apply for a point of connection, there is a requirement for DNOs to m- m- you know make an offer. But if the power's not available, the offer will come back with reinforcement. So that means the DNO needs to do some work to their network to need to reinforce their network to provide the power that you need. Um, so that can be anything from a few months' work to a major program that can take up to years sometimes. We've had offers come back recently with 5-year waits for the power. So in those instances, what you could look at is, okay, you've applied for 2 MVA, for example. There's reinforcement to provide that. Actually, if you applied for 1.5 or 1 900, would that be available? So there is that engagement and discussions with the DNO to see actually what could be provided. Other things we see as well is the DNOs can provide a temporary load. So it might not be exactly what you need, but it's something for a few years whilst they do the reinforcement work, and then the power is available. It's quite rare that there's nothing, um, or there's no, or it's a really really long reinforcement. But yeah, so the DNOs will come back with an offer similar to that, which does happen, and then it's really a decision for the customer as to whether they want to proceed and wait, or not. And then interactive connections. It's a very strict process with interactivity. So what happens with interactivity is if there's more than one application for power in an area, there's a strict queuing process. So the DNO will produce a queue based on who's applied and when, and then the offer goes out to the first party, and they've got a reduced timeline to accept that. So it goes down
Okay.
to 30 days. So then the customer gets to decide they've got 30 days. If they choose not to accept it, it goes to the second person and the third person, then the fourth person until someone accepts the power. So that's a strict process for interactive. It just means customers need to they might not get the power if they've applied if they're lower down the queue, or B, they need to make a quick decision, because if you miss the 30 days, then you'll lose the power and it'll go to the next person.
And I think this just reinforces the messaging that we have throughout a lot of the topics we talk about. It's that early engagement, isn't it? You're not committed and there's no obligation at just that feasibility stage in the process, especially if you're responsible for multi locations and you have an entire estate of sites that you have to electrify. Like, there's no getting away from it. You've got a commercial fleet of vehicles that have to go into an alternative fueling method. Electric is the one that seems to work in the categories we look at. So it's about that early engagement, get the applications in as quickly as possible. You then end up, and in my experience as well, Joe, I don't think I've worked with a customer in the last 8 years where their original perception and plan was exactly how it kind of ended up being delivered and mobilized. Things change all the time. And I think that's where I've worked with ESP for long enough to realize your adaptability and your agility, and the fact that you're able to support customers, because things have to change. If something comes back and there's, if there's an interactive connection, or if they're in a queue, you will always come back to us with alternative options and suggestions to help guide the customer and us through that process, which for me, I think is really, really important. And would you agree? Early
Yeah,
plan, get the applications in, and then you can assess what you're dealing with from a holistic perspective.
yeah, I couldn't agree more, Natasha. So it is get the applications in, see what comes back, look at the costs, look at what's not available, and then actually, do we need to amend what we're asking for? If it's too expensive, do we need to look at a lower load? Do we need to look at an LV connection? I mean, there is always an option,
Yeah,
but yeah, the first stage is get those applications in so you know what you're dealing with. I know it's just about reviewing the data. Again, which we do. I mean, we recently applied for nearly 20 POCs for a customer. They all came in. We summarized, the challenges, if there is reinforcement, the costs, the milestones to accept those dates. And then it's just about an open and honest discussion with the customer, see their thoughts, and try to support them come to a decision. And then once they've made a decision, helping to develop that rollout plan.
excellent, Joe. So we're getting close to wrapping up now, and I'm really enjoying these conversations, because I remember when I started in the industry, this for me felt just like a little bit of a scary, overwhelming place to be when it came to power and getting grid connections. But working through it and working alongside a company like ESP, you tend to take the headache away, I think, which is a really, really key point. From your perspective, then, this is your moment, Joe. We've kindly agreed to come on and have a chat with us. But for me, I think it's really important that you get the opportunity to explain, maybe to the audience, why ESP? Why should any companies involve an IDNO, and why would it be ESP? I mean, what are you doing in the industry, do you think, in your mind, that kind of puts you a little bit ahead of everybody else?
Yeah, sure. So for ESP, we take a slightly different approach in that we've got a full team of project and program management professionals to support customers through the grid connection process. So that's very much from the first step, applying for the point of connection, right through to the energization and completions process. So working with ESP and my team, we're there to support that journey. We're available. We meet regularly. We provide updates, and it's just, I think it is that collaboration and that engagement to really push these connections through. A big USP for ESP is our legal team. So as I sort of mentioned earlier, there's all in-house, 14 people, all there to drive the legal program, drive the land rights, and get these sites completed as quickly as possible. So that's probably the main points really. We're here to support that connection process and ultimately try and make it as pain-free as possible and as quick as possible, so the site's turned on in line with the customer's requirements.
And I couldn't echo that any further there, Joe. And I've mentioned this before, Mayor, we've been so fortunate to work with you guys now for a long time. And I think that's exactly the level of service that you provide us and our customers. You are the IDNO that we work with. And I think, together we are starting to make some real, we're starting to energize some big projects. We're helping customers through this process. For me, it's always about just being well informed and helping our customers understand these processes and the implications and the consequences of decisions that get made. But it's supporting them, isn't it? It's holding their hand through a process that they're not expected to know inside out and understand. That's why you bring in an expert like Mayor and ESP to help you through that process. So I just want to wrap up then, and I do this a lot in the podcast, but considering our audience, we're fleets evolved, and we're trying to address a lot of fleet organizations that are electrifying right now. If there was one closing comment or something you wish fleet operators understood a little bit better, or if there's one piece of advice you would like to give at this stage, what would your closing piece of advice be to the audience?
Oh, great question. Start planning early. We do occasionally get customers who need a connection in a very short
Yesterday.
amount of time. So I think it's just about understanding the timelines, starting early, and engaging in the process, and getting lawyers engaged as quickly as possible. I think if we establish some kind of key upfront principles and yeah, I think it can make the whole process much smoother and much quicker.
Excellent. Listen, thank you, Joe. That's it for this episode of Fleets Evolved. Thank you for listening, and thanks to Joe for sharing his invaluable insight today. If anything we've discussed has raised questions about your own fleet, you'll find a link in the description and on our website to continue the conversation. Or you can fill out our contact form and one of our experts will be in touch. We'll be back soon with another honest discussion on how fleets are really evolving. Thank you and goodbye for now.